In days long ago, people would come to the drive-in to experience highs and lows, to laugh, or cry, or scream. Those days have passed us by, and all the drive-ins have long since closed their doors. Those great movies have been forgotten.
And welcome to the Radio of Horror Show here on 91.3 FM WCW in Worcester. If you're not catching us online or on Radio Free America, hopefully you're catching this on our YouTube channel, which is where we stick with most of our interviews here for the Radio of Horror Show. And tonight on Radio of Horror, back on the show with us, author of the Drive-In Horror Show anthology book, Ghoulish Stories, Volume 1. We will have one half of the creator team of the Drive-In Horror Show, Michael Neel, on the show with us to talk a little bit about some of the great spooky tales that appear in here, such as, I think, the app, the crawl space, Plastic Island, Nightmare Cards, and many more, as the Drive-In Horror Show has evolved from a film, a little independent film made over 9 years ago, to comic books, to books, and soon maybe lunchboxes and cereal and action figures. Is that where we're going next? Maybe a video game, Mike?
Oh, that would be fantastic. Yes to all of them. The old metal lunchboxes.
Are you gonna develop your own app that allows you to take control of people and do things?
That's the idea,
It's kind of like an app that you would use to dare people to do things and just to see if they would actually do it. Something I'm surprised they didn't come up with for the TV series Jackass or something.
Right. Yeah. If Jackass was around now, they probably would.
Why did you want to evolve the Drive-In Horror Show into a book anthology instead of doing another film?
That's a good question. So we finished the film in 2009. It was released in 2011. And after we finished, we did some more stories. We wrote some more scripts then. And then in the intervening years, had some other stories and stuff. And, at a certain point, we're like, well, it's tough to, making an anthology film can be tricky. And, we'd still love to make something, but at that point, I guess this was 2016, we said, well, let's try our hand at some fiction, while we're waiting to get these things done on the big screen. And we started putting them out on Wattpad, which is it's a free reading app. It's like YouTube for authors, and found a good audience. So we just kind of kept going. So the first batch was mostly stories that were scripts that we either hadn't, mostly that we hadn't filmed. A couple where the scripts were together for the first, say 2 acts, then we needed to write the third. But by and large, they were all there. And then we started doing new stories too. So when all was said and done, we ended up with about 18. And then we ended up taking most of them off of Wattpad and putting 8 of them into the first volume, Ghoulish Stories, Volume 1. And that's where we are today, And one nice thing too about writing is, there's no budgetary restrictions. So we were able to let our minds just really wander and make things as epic as we wanted to. And, everything in the story, they're all filmable, but the budgets would vary wildly, So it's nice to be able just to, have something that exists and on the page, and in someone's imagination if we do it right,
Have you ever thought about making just a series of short films for, here and there for like a YouTube channel or video on demand, and just do it as one little short film at a time instead of having to worry about putting something huge together again?
Oh, sure. We're open to pretty much anything and everything. At the moment we're working on it as a series itself. So, trying to get that off the ground. But sure, the funny thing is, ever since we finished, when we finished our movie in 2009, the landscape was really DVDs, and it was still Netflix renting DVDs. Video on demand was nothing. And, now, DVDs are just collector's items, and it's kind of a dead market for distribution companies of films like ours. At least it's not the same kind of lucrative market it was before. But for collectors and for horror fans, there still is a DVD market and Blu-ray and, especially those older films, the Shout Factory films and the stuff from the 80s and 90s and 70s and stuff that gets repackaged. But, so, the bigger picture is that everything has changed so much since we even started. So, where this ends up on the big screen kind of remains to be seen. But there's certainly, lots of possibilities for it and that sort of thing.
Did you take advantage of the drive-in this weekend? Because over at the Mendon Twin Drive-in, close to where we both lived, they were showing Friday the 13th, Part 1 and 2, at part of their opening weekend.
I saw that. No, we couldn't make it, unfortunately. I would love to see that. We watched Friday the 13th Part 2 at home just because you have to watch, one of them at least on a Friday the 13th. No, those would have been amazing to see on the big screen. Do you know what those digital projections? I mean, I don't think they have their film projectors there anymore.
They gotta be digital because that drive-in got a huge update over 5 years ago when the Endelman brothers, as part of Phantom Gourmet, bought them. So
Yeah,
they
that's
probably
right.
had the cash in order to afford those digital projectors because those guys are so so big in the food industry. So
Yeah, no, I know they updated. I don't know if they kept their film projectors at all, but that place is amazing. I love it. I absolutely love it.
I went there. Excuse me. I hadn't been to the drive-in in a couple of years, and I went there this past October, and they showed Halloween 1, 2, and 3 in October.
Cool.
Yeah. My girlfriend hadn't been to the drive-in, I think, in a long time or ever. I can't remember which one she said. So I took her to that or whatever. And I mean, we were by the third film, Halloween 3, there were very few cars there, but we stayed till the very end, up until like around 1 a.m. to watch all 3 Halloween films.
That is so cool. That's awesome.
One of the questions I had to ask you was because my kid plays it a lot, and you have a story in here that's like a weird mesh of Pokemon meeting some type of like terrifying nightmare creature.
Yeah.
Does your son play Pokemon, and will you ever ban it from the house after writing this story and realizing this is gonna come back and bite me in the ass? No, you can't play Pokemon Go. Go outside and just run around in the fresh air. Go play in the graveyard like I did when I was a boy.
Right, exactly. No, it's funny actually. I haven't. I do not play Pokemon. I'm a big gamer. I played other card games, growing up and things like that, and not Magic as much, but I like the Star Trek, card game, which is kind of like Magic, and a bunch of tabletop games. But no, I never. No Pokemon yet. Are you referring to Nightmare cards? Is that your one?
Nightmare cards.
Yeah. Yeah, for people that don't know, that's one where there's like I said, it's like a mixture of like Pokemon and Nightmare on Elm Street or something. Like, this magical place where people create nightmares for kids, and it's integrated into this bizarre card game. That came about because when we were on Wattpad, we got invited to be part of an anthology with over 100 stories all together. Yeah, it was based on the Decameron, which was out, a couple hundred years ago. I should know this, but I'm blanking on it at the moment. But anyway, it was a short story book that was 100 stories, each told by, over 10 days, 10 people telling a story each over 10 days. Was the frame, and each day is about a different theme. So love, loss, misunderstanding, etc. And we got chosen to write a story for that anthology, and in our frame narrative, all of the people, the authors, were supposed to be together in this fictional location in a school, and we were our characters, it was the drive-in horror show characters, were playing cards, and it morphed into them. Greg was like, well, playing cards isn't that scary, they should be doing something spooky, and they ended up playing cards for kids' souls, and that was kind of like a throwaway, and then that idea kind of stuck in Greg's mind, and he started writing on it and writing on the world, and just ended up kind of coming up with the idea. So it's funny how these things can pop out of the smallest little detail. Like that was a nothing when it came up. It was like one other thing just to put in the story to make it interesting. So you never know where these things come from.
Are you going to do more comic books? Because you had the one-shot comic book a while back before you put out this anthology.
Oh, we'd love to. There's at least one other story we have that actually we tried to adapt into a short story. Really didn't work. It's very visual, more action-based. I think it would really fit a comic book style very well. I mean, the gore is unbelievable. It's just utterly disgusting, and I don't have any problem describing it, but I think in a comic book, form would be great. So we have that one. We've thought of others. We'd love to. I mean, the comic books are something that we can write them, but we don't draw, we don't lay it out. It's really based on somebody else. So we're always open to it. I mean, the first one took a lot of work and dedication from Jerem Morrow, who did the illustration and adaptation, and She Blank did the coloring, and they worked on their own and just did a spectacular job. I love what they did. They did a great job.
When I was reading Crawl Space, I kind of, for some reason, every time I think of a crawl space or anything involving any dark part underneath the house, I always think of Wes Craven's People Under the Stairs. Maybe that's just me.
Yeah. No, you're right. I think everybody does. Definitely.
Dark enclosed spaces where you don't know what the hell's underneath there, and God only knows what it could possibly be. When I lived in Webster, Massachusetts, in this house that my grandparents used to live in, and then when my parents split up, it was the first house my mother moved into. When she moved to Massachusetts in 1990, there was a space under the stairs that we could not get into. And to this very day, I mean, we only lived there for about a year and a half. I never found out what was underneath that area.
Oh yeah. Well, when you're a kid, you really want to and I know for that story in particular, there's a crawl space in in the basement behind a little door, and I remember, and we're in New England, growing up and seeing in my parents' basement or my houses, the house where I grew up in the basement or other people's old New England houses, like they're just weird doors sometimes in these far off places in a stairwell or a corner of the house that just they're gonna be like 2 or 3 feet tall. They'll look almost like they're for trolls or something, or I just always thought that was really interesting and kind of creepy. And there was one in my friend's house growing up that we actually could get into, but it was probably like 2 feet tall. You had to go in through the basement, and it was like right underneath the kitchen, and it was covered in like cobwebs and old leaves and stuff like that, and soot. I mean, we crawled in there once; it came out absolutely filthy, So it was fun, but it feels kind of dangerous too. It's like you probably shouldn't be up here,
Yeah, probably. There's a great museum in Salem, Massachusetts. They just moved to what used to be like this former bank. And it's the Count Orlok's Nightmare Gallery, and they have this giant vault that they can't get into.
Oh, wow. No kidding.
Yeah, so they're like, what could possibly be in there? Gold? Old money?
Oh, God. Right, bodies, probably.
Yeah, so they're like, they don't have the combination, they don't know anyone who does, so it's going to be one of those like long-standing mysteries of like, how do we get into here?
That's really cool. Wow, that's awesome.
Who did all the illustrations in your book?
When we put them on Wattpad, we needed to have a cover for each different story because of the way Wattpad works. And we reached out to the artist that we used for Infinite Santa and also our comic book. So,
okay, that's why it looked so familiar. All right.
Yeah, so it's different styles. The cover, which is from the Two Drop Donut story, is done by Jerem Morrow, who did the comic, and colored by Jeff O'Brien, who is our Infinite Santa colorist and also one of the effects guys on Drive-In Horror Show. And the other art was drawn by Nick Flanagan, who was the original. He was the artist on the original Infinite Santa web series, and also one of the effects people on Drive-In Horror Show, and also my tattoo artist. So, you meet good people and you work with them again and again, and they just did a great job. And we needed 18 different covers for Wattpad, and you only need one really for a book, but we figured let's put an art gallery in the back, with some of the black and white versions of the covers, and the Kindle version actually has the color ones back there because the color ones printed in black and white just kind of look like crap. The ones we have now just look way better. So, but yeah, it's a nice kind of asset to have, and I love working with those guys. They all do great work and everything, so it's cool.
What authors did you read as a kid growing up?
Oh, good question. I mean, Stephen King, was my favorite. I still love Stephen King. He was the best. I loved Clive Barker. Big fan of his. Let's see. I mean, when I was much younger, like Roald Dahl, was a big one. Any of those kind of fantasy, your young adult authors and stuff like that. I always, when I got older, I got into Harlan Ellison a lot. His stuff is pretty wild. And who's the other one? Lovecraft. I tried to read Lovecraft when I was a kid, and I couldn't get through the language, Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until probably 10, 15 years ago that I was able to really break through and just, suck it all in. Because I knew, I'd read every Stephen King there was, to read. And so I knew how much he loved him and how important he was. But it's Lovecraft's tough, man. It takes a while to get used to reading it. So, but yeah, I'd say those were the big ones. I mean, I read pretty much anything I could when I was a kid. But Stephen King's the biggest one. And if you in the book too, I mean, I think the influences are pretty clear, in certain spots. So at least to me, anyway.
There's a movie coming out in September called The House with the Clock in Its Walls, based on the novel by John Bellairs.
Yes, I saw that. It looks so good.
The artwork in it, in the book, was done by Edward Gorey. Edward Gorey actually did most of John Bellairs' novels.
Yeah, that's right.
And the movie is being directed by Massachusetts native Eli Roth and being written by Supernatural TV series creator Eric Kripke. So
I knew the Eli Roth thing. I didn't know the other one. That's cool. Wow.
A lot of really great talent with it. I don't know if you'd ever read John's stuff when you were a kid, because God, that his stuff really influenced me, and I still to this very day try and track down on eBay or Amazon when I go to used bookstores the Edward Gorey artwork books that he did. You can find the books usually at Barnes & Noble, and I guarantee that whoever owns the publishing rights to his novels today is probably waiting in the wings to start mass producing them in August or getting closer to the movie's release, which is great. So a whole new generation of kids, such as your son and my son, can gravitate to them, but they don't have access to all of the Eli Roth, Edward Gorey artwork, except for the inside cover piece. Back and front covers, I don't know much about like copyright with artwork and things like that, and the Edward Gorey estate doesn't have they're not reprinting it, so who knows? But did you ever read him as a kid?
Oh, I loved him. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, The House with the Clock on Its Walls, I read over and over again. And I loved all that Edward Gorey artwork. His stuff on the covers was just really, really evocative. The one that I just realized that I just remembered was the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books. I mean, those were huge influence. Absolutely scared the shit out of me as a kid.
Yeah.
And it was the illustrations more than the actual stories. But I mean, my mom got that from me. And because she knows into horror, and I was younger. I mean, I think this is before I was able to watch, some of the, more brutal horror movies and stuff. And I don't think if she'd looked inside that she would have really given it to me, because, it seems like it's aimed more for children, and it is, but it's, oh my God, this stuff is so scary,
Now, the funny thing is, this has been in development for a while. There's a documentary coming out about those books.
Yep, I think they're getting close to done. I funded them on Kickstarter, and I've been following them on Twitter. They're getting there. I mean, it's hard to tell always with a documentary, but it seems like they're moving along.
Did you guys ever think about doing that to fund another film or another project connected to the Drive-In Horror Show franchise?
Oh, sure. I mean, there's nothing. If the right thing came along, sure. I mean, you need to. The thing about a Drive-In Horror Show is it's 6 different stories. Like the movie, was the 5 different tales in the frame narrative. So the cost of production definitely goes up. I mean, it just remains to be seen about what it actually is. Like, we could always do a Kickstarter, like pre-order for like a Blu-ray or something. That would be super reasonable. Those aren't really that expensive, and we have the right, to that. So, I'd say at this point, probably a smaller thing would be more likely, but you just never know. I mean, like I was saying before, the whole landscape has changed so much, and the viability of crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, it just depends on the project, but I wouldn't rule it out. Sure, not at all,
What's the future look like for Volume 2 and subsequent volumes of this?
Yeah, so we have another 10 stories after this, and we have some other things in the pipeline that will probably be ready at some point. So, I'd say look for Volume 2 probably about next year, early in the year, maybe late this year. I'd say as early as Halloween at the very earliest. So maybe I might not be right. We have to wait and see. We're still riding the release of this one, and so it's nice to be able to have that to look forward to. But there are definitely a whole bunch more stories to get out there. The hardest thing about all this was not to put them all out at once.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh, I want to get all these stories out. Get everybody to see them and everything, and Greg was very smartly at first like, well, that's cool, but you know what? Let's save it because, let's spread them out, let people enjoy them. And, I'll read a 600-page book of short stories, but not everybody would want to read something that's huge. Ours wouldn't be 600, but it would be a couple hundred pages easy, So, let's make it more accessible,
Now, would you ever open it up to other people to write stories for the Drive-In Horror Show?
Oh, sure. Yeah, definitely. I mean, at the moment it's just Greg and I, but our big approach for Drive-In Horror Show was always, any genre goes. As long as it's horror. Like we have stuff that's, comedic horror, straight ahead horror, brutal, a lot of sci-fi. I mean, there's one, the Plastic Island story, and Ghoulish Stories is about as sci-fi as it gets. There's very little horror in there, but so we've always tried to keep a really open mind with this. So, that also goes to other authors. I mean, yeah, if someone wanted to come and join the horror show family and they had the right, the right kind of story and the right name and everything, like, we're not doing it at the moment, but we're certainly be open to it,
What type of stories would you be looking for exactly? Because it being an anthology series, it can kind of go through a range of different ideas.
Anything. We don't really limit it. Like I said, we're not really necessarily looking for it right now, so I don't know if I've thought that literally about it. But no, I mean, just the horror short story is its own little animal, and stories that are able to work and be scary and interesting, are all good for us.
Since you're based in Massachusetts, would you? The one thing I couldn't remember exactly was, did you have a specific area that the Drive-In Horror Show itself within the film or in the context of the book probably like take place? Because people love that sort of thing.
Oh, sure. No, we never said exactly.
Okay.
It's supposed to be very Americana. I mean, we filmed it up here. We filmed it in Mendon, the one you were just talking about. Where they were showing Friday the 13th on Friday, the 1 and 2 back to back. But aside from that, no. I mean, the only other thing we really wanted was we wanted it to look kind of creepy. We filmed it in May, back before it was, before it was really populated, and the leaves were on the trees and stuff, but not, not super lush or anything. And so, no, to answer your question, not really. I mean, we filmed the Drive-In Horror Show around here, so there are certain parts that definitely look very New England, and and some of the stories in the book take place up here, but there's other ones that are more spread out, so we try not to do too much of the same thing,
Definitely. People go to driveinhorrorshow.com, correct, to purchase a copy of the book, or on Amazon?
Yeah, so Drive-In Horror Show, excuse me, I can never say it right. Driveinhorrorshow.com is the best place to do it. It is on Amazon. It's also in Kindle, so it's paperback and Kindle. It's also on Kobo or Nook. So for those of you that have the Barnes & Noble Nook device, it's there. And Kobo is probably for your listeners that are reading in Asia. That tends to be much more popular in Asia,
Okay.
so that kind of covers our other part of the globe. So.
I was curious, what is Kobo? I was like, what?
Yeah, no, it's funny. It's one of those that, when you put a book out and you publish it on e-readers, it's one of those that's just kind of a, one you have to have, because if otherwise you're cutting off a giant part of the world, So it was a no-brainer for us. Those are the big three e-publishers, and then Amazon paperback. But whatever. There's lots of good choices. I mean, I personally like to have the paperback in my hands, but the e-readers are great. They all have the full color posters, in there that you can zoom in on. So that's a nice plus if you're into that kind of thing. So yeah, there you go, man.
No, I feel the same way. There's very few books I have on digital. Same thing with like comic books. As being a big comic book reader, I always try to buy the floppies more often. I don't mind maybe sometime like renting a book or a comic book on like the library app, which is great because it's free, and I don't have to worry about it like keeping up space somewhere. So
right,
and that's kind of like usually
nice.
like a hey, I kind of want to read that, but I don't want to actually buy it.
Right. Yeah, that can get expensive really quickly.
Definitely. Well, hey, Mike, thank you so much for coming back on the show with us to talk about the Drive-In Horror Show presenting Ghoulish Stories, Volume 1.
Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it, man.